Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. I've had my lunch. I'm energized, and this is the first of 4 shows I'm bringing you in this chunk of content today. And I was just saying to Niels, my guest, it seems like it's been a long time we've been talking about his book as being a project in the distant future, but now I'm happy to say, he'll be happy to say, it's in the much closer pre-ordering first volume. Must stress, first volume of a series of books. And if there's one aspect of the D-Day story that is not told enough or is mistold, it is the German side of D-Day. And so Niels is the perfect guy to bring in. His book, Defending Normandy, Volume 1, all in the links below. I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Niels.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here.
So I think it's important to just talk about the fact that the study of the past is connected to today, and the fact that democracy and the world, Giles hinted at it, and Nick Hewitt, you've been busy out with elections. Europe has a very busy schedule. So remind us what's going on there in the Netherlands.
Yeah, the elections for the European Parliament are today in the Netherlands, and I'm head of a polling station. So I've been up since 4 a.m. to prepare and meeting the voters. And I'm now on my break, and I thought it was a wonderful moment to combine this, being able to have a democracy and being able to vote and do that on this very special day, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So I think that's it's very busy, but it's also a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, it's strange how things have coalesced. That June the 6th is a day where there you are. We're voting for the future of Europe, for the future of all sorts of things, and France as well. Mags put her vote in for the 9th, with things happening here, and UK election July, and elections in America, in the USA coming up, and you know we mustn't take democracy for granted. But anyway, you've come armed with a PowerPoint. The subject of this talk is, well, I've already explained it. I'm going to hand over to Niels there. Fire away with questions. We'll deal with a few of them as we can, and then we'll progress. But over to you, Niels.
Yeah. So first time to talk about my book with some pictures in it. And I thought that for today, I'm just going to explain a bit about what's going on with the book, how I set it up. And then we will focus on the 91st Air Landing Division, which is, of course, very relevant for D-Day. So I'd say just go to the next slide. So just to give people a bit of context, my book is, first volumes are very much aimed at the Cotentin Peninsula, which is, of course, part of Lower Normandy, which in the German military sense also included the Channel Islands. And this is, as people probably know, you have the commander in the west, von Rundstedt, and then we have the commander of Army Group B for Northern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, that's Rommel. And then Lower Normandy and Brittany are the responsibility of the 7th Army under General Oberst Dolman. And then Lower Normandy, including the Channel Islands, is the responsibility of the 84th Army Corps. And the 84th Army Corps is also one of the commands I follow in my book. And I start following them in 1941 when this Army Corps arrives in Normandy. And by following the development of this Army Corps, you can also follow the development of the defenses in Normandy. And if you look at this particular map, it's an original German map, you can see that there's actually quite a few German formations on D-Day. And one of the things that's important to realize is that there's a lot more divisions on D-Day in Lower Normandy than there were, say, at the end of 1943. So just to mention these divisions a bit, we have the 7th, 16th, and the 352nd Infantry Division on the Calvados. And then on the Cotentin Peninsula, we have 3 infantry divisions, the 709th, the 243rd, and the 91st Air Landing Division, which you can see here in the center. And it's outlined in red because it was considered Army Reserve. So that's basically the situation we have on D-Day, and we also have, of course, the 21st Panzer Division as an Army Group Reserve in the wider Caen area. And the Cotentin Peninsula is very important to the Germans, but also to the Allies, because it has the deep water port of Cherbourg. So if you do not want to rely on your Mulberry harbors or landing craft bringing in supplies and additional troops, Cherbourg is very important. And in the German perception, they, of course, know Cherbourg is important. They consider it a fortress, which means extra defenses, and focus on the way the Germans approach the peninsula. So I think we can move to the next one. Just to talk a little bit about the geography, I know Paul's already done a myth-busting show about everything in Normandy being bocage, that not being the case. And That's of course also true for this part of Normandy, although the southern part, and especially if you're going further south, that's very much bocage country. It's a bit different further north. But what's very important feature in this area of Normandy, especially in the first 2 weeks in determining how the fighting is going, aren't necessarily ridges and hills, but it's water. Behind Utah Beach you already have inundated fields, which is one of the reasons they dropped paratroopers to secure the western end of the causeways and deal with German batteries. But these fields very much restrict movement, especially when you're a mechanized force. And the Germans are using these waterways in connection with these hedgerows to build their defense. And you can often see them pulling back from one stream to another stream and then building up new defenses there. So that's very much how the fighting goes on. In the first weeks, also in certain parts of Normandy around Carentan, you can see this in July. And of course, the key rivers are in the area, the Merdre River, the Douve River, you have the Toad, and further east you have the Vier. And the banks of these rivers and the fields surrounding these have been flooded, so there's a lot of water in this particular area. However, ridges are important in certain areas and in certain periods of the fighting. That's very true in the fighting around Cherbourg. But also the Germans try to block the American approach towards Cherbourg on the so-called Kineville Ridge, which is to the northeast of Montebourg. And in early July, there's a lot of heavy fighting going on in the area where Paul's writing a book about, around La Haye-du-Puy, where we have the very famous Montcastre, we have Montgardon Ridge, La Poterie Ridge, Mont-Étanclin, and Mont-Dauvieux. So that's fair. In that area, hills are very, very important. And what you can also see on this map is where the German strong points are. And you can very clearly see the outline of Cherbourg, the Cherbourg Landfront, as the Germans called it, and also lots of positions on the Joburg Peninsula, that's on the extreme northwest tip of the peninsula. And the Germans also, with these positions, try to take advantage of the terrain. Another thing that's interesting to see here is that there's very little defensive positions on the west coast of the peninsula, and in comparison, there are quite a few along the east side of the peninsula, where we have, of course, Utah Beach. Some key features in this area are the N13 highway stretching from Paris to Cherbourg, and running more or less alongside that highway is a double railroad, and those are of course also important to control, as well as some main roads leading from the south into the peninsula. And if you're the Germans, you want to keep them open to bring up supplies and reinforcements, and if you're the Americans, you want to cut them off. And as you may know, originally the Americans intended to land further west with the 92nd or 82nd Airborne Division, but the 91st Air Landing Division showed up, and then they decided we need to move our troops because it's going to be too exposed, and we cannot cut this, especially the road running through Saint-Sauveur, and they decided to move their forces further east to have them more concentrated. So next one.
Well, just to address a question from Kevin Jones, and I'll answer it, and then you can add something to it. Did the Allies have extensive information to read the flooded areas? Well, basically, the way I describe it is they knew about some of it, but not the extent of it, because sometimes the water was quite shallow and there were reeds growing up through it, and there was a misidentification of some of the areas kind of on the fringes. But yes, they know the main areas of flooding, but not the full extent. Does that kind of ring true with what you would understand as well, Niels?
Yeah, pretty much. And I also think that there's a difference between the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne, because the 82nd Airborne is moved towards the east quite late in the planning phase. And I think I get the impression that their troops were less aware of the situation in that particular area than they had been in the original area. So I think that's also a part why the 82nd Airborne may have been a bit less well prepared for this than the, yeah. So, okay. Just some basic approach, if you want to know, learn about any battle, what's your general approach. And of course, you're going to read books, you're going to look at articles, you're going to see what's online. And if that's not enough, or you want to know more, you can go to the period records and personal accounts or studies written by individuals. So that's just an overview, and let's see how this translates to this particular area of Normandy. So there are thousands of books, articles, publications about Normandy, and this is just a very small selection. This is 1947 to 2022. Some of these books are in French, some are in German, most are in English. And all of these cover aspects of the fighting on the peninsula in one way or another. And I want to highlight one in particular because it was a main inspiration for my own book, and that's Nicholas Zetterling's book on the top right. And most people really appreciate this book because it has mini histories of a lot of different, of basically all the ground forces that fought in Normandy. So that's very useful. But if I look, for instance, at the 91st Air Landing Division, you only have 3 pages, including endnotes. But that's not a whole lot. And it's also one of the reasons why I was thinking there's more to add, both on the organization of this formation, but also to add more information about the history of this division. And that's stuff I've been doing for lots of different formations that are fighting on the peninsula, and the 91st we're discussing today is just one of those. Also, 2 people I would like to thank, Simon True and Steve Saloga, 2 books they either wrote or participated with on as well. Simon has provided lots of information from the archives and from his own research, which he sent to me when he realized we were working on a similar project. And he said, "You're farther ahead, so here you go." But it was very much appreciated. And Steve Saloga sent some very useful photos also for the 91st Air Landing chapter. So both of you, thank you very much. And I hope the readers will also enjoy your contribution. So the problem is, with all these books we just seen, if you want to know what's going on the peninsula, it is not actually enough what's in these books, and also it's not enough if you combine the whole body that's been written about Normandy. Some books are too high level, some are basically about the Americans and tell a bit about the German side of the story, but generally speaking, the German side isn't very well discussed. So what you would do then, of course, you would try to find information in the archives. The problem is that for the 84th Army Corps, there are basically no surviving records for 1944, and that includes also the 6 infantry divisions that fought on the peninsula. So that's a massive loss of information. One way to, there are records for at higher levels, so 7th Army, Army Group B, OB West, but the problem is the higher you go, the more detail gets lost. And the few surviving after action reports I actually have from divisions or from Army Corps level, and if you compare them what's in the 7th Army records, just one level up, you see how much information is missing, and that's just something we have to deal with, and something that requires reconstruction from other types of information and other sources, and that's just something we have to deal with. Something else that's a way to deal with that would be personal accounts from key officers, to see what they were doing, what they were encountering, the decisions they were making. The problem is that we have 7 key officers on this map, and the 5 on the right did not survive June 1944. And of course, we know von Kluge committed suicide in August and Rommel in October. So these would have had very useful perspectives and information to provide on decisions they made, issues they were facing that are not evident from the records, but we do not have this information. So how do you deal with this if you want to know more what's going on the peninsula? And for me, the answer was start focusing on formations and find little bits of information about a formation, and together they form pieces of the puzzle, and the more of those you have, the easier it becomes to get a more complete picture. So yeah, I've shown this one on Twitter before, and this just goes to illustrate how many different, these are the majority of German formation that fought on the peninsula or were at a command role in one form or another. And as you may imagine, if you know the story about each of these formations, if you put everything together, you get quite an understanding of what's going on. Particular level I find useful are the division level, because sort of everything seems to connect and come together at that particular level. So here they're in white. And these are the divisions, the infantry, the 6 infantry divisions I'm covering in volume 1A and 1B, which is coming out around Christmas, hopefully. But there's also the 2nd SS, the 17th SS, and the 5th Fallschirmjäger division, which are also relevant. Next. So this is just a quick overview to illustrate why I think divisions are a great way of approaching this problem. As you can see, divisions are responsible for different sectors at different times. So if you want to know about what's going on behind Utah Beach, the 709th Infantry Division is a great formation to focus on. But if you want to know, for instance, what's going on around Moncastre, then it's the 77th Infantry Division, the 353rd Infantry Division, and the 343rd Infantry Division. And if you go further east or south, you run into the 17th SS and the 2nd SS. But there was also battle groups, as you can see here from these particular divisions. And that means there's also always overlap between these formations. So if you know a bit about one, you also start to find information about the other one. So it's sort of a mosaic of different formations, and the better you understand each of these formations, the better you will understand the peninsula.
And I just want to jump in, Niels, and just say, because we were talking before going live, is that to understand the German military, you have to understand the different language, obviously, but also a different language within the language, because the way that units are specified is different. The structures of the divisions are different. The terminology doesn't always transfer from Allied to German and German to Allied about what is what. So it's why over the years, a lot of authors have just sort of relied on the work previous people have done, because it's just such a big task to take on board if you don't understand it, and why you're breezing through all this understanding because of your decade plus, is it nearly 2 decades now of kind of specialist study in this. So you've managing to make it look easy, but for most people it's been a really uphill struggle.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good observation, because a lot of authors, even today, are saying things that is based on research or work and things that have been written by other people, and sometimes going back to the 1940s or 1950s, and we'll come on one of the examples of this. And it has been repeated by others, believing it must be correct because others have written this already. So they're forming each other, and I think often they're not even given it any second thought that this might be outdated or not correct, which is also one of the reasons I'm sort of sorry that I wasn't able to get the book out last year, so people would already for this anniversary of DDay would have some new information they would have been able to use. But it
was like waiting for Star Wars films 10 years ago. The longer the wait, the more the excitement builds. So yes, we'd have liked to have had your book last year, but we all know it's going to be a game changer when it arrives. And I don't use that language lightly, but your book is absolutely going to be a game changer. So yeah, we'll move on to the next part. So there you are. Back to you.
So this might also be interesting. So when I study a division, I want to know, first I want to get a feel for what is this division, or this formation. And for me, that means understanding its organization, their mobility, the troops they consisted of, how old they were organized, what kind of weaponry they had. But that's why when I'm talking about divisions, but I will also in other volumes when I'm talking about independent battalions, I will always follow this approach: organization and equipment first, so we know what this is. And you might think in the Allied sense, well, a division is a division. But in the German army, in these 6 divisions on the Continental Peninsula, they're all very, very different, even if they're all infantry divisions. So that's why it's extra important to better understand these formations, to really look at what are these. And it's sometimes it seems obvious, and people have thought it was obvious, and then you start digging deeper, and it becomes more and more complicated, but also more and more interesting. So that's one aspect I always look at, but also I look then at their pre-invasion history. What have they been doing, especially in the West? Eastern Front is not always relevant, and for these particular divisions that fought in Normandy, these 6, none of these were ever in the East, so that makes it a bit easier. But for instance, when I look at Osttruppen, a lot of them originate from these, then I go back to the Eastern Front and see what they were doing there. But that's fortunately for these infantry division, that wasn't necessary. And after you know what they've been doing and where they are on D-Day, I of course start looking at their role in the actual fighting. And for today, I'm going to take a quick look at some aspects, some myths, some misconceptions, some general ideas people have about the 91st Air Landing Division. And just to start, you have these 2 symbols, and you can find these online sometimes, and in books and in archives, or not in archives, in books and in websites. And I see these symbols, and I think, where's the evidence? Because I've not seen evidence for these particular symbols being used. And there might be some evidence out there. I couldn't find it, which is also why I'm not including these in the book. If I ever find the information, I'll add it in a new volume or maybe post it online. But if I can't find it, the information, I'm not including it. And that's also true for other divisions. And we know now, and I'm still looking deeper into that, vehicles of infantry divisions especially, but also other formations, they removed insignia before the invasion, because the Germans were realizing this is helping the resistance to get information out to the Allies. So a lot of vehicles had been marked, but they were removed before the invasion. And for newer formations, it's even questionable if symbols had actually ever been applied. I'm not talking about tactical symbols, but I'm talking about things that help identify a division or similar formation.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
So the 91st Air Landing Division. What is an air landing division? Well, first of all, these are very rare in the German military. There were only 2 during the war, one early in the war, the 22nd, and then in 1944 they decided to form another one. And the idea of an air landing division is that you're either going to land it on a captured airfield, or an airfield you already have behind a front line, and it's kind of a rapid response force. And if you're not going to landing by aircraft, you can also transport a division by glider. So this is a sort of was intended as a kind of rapid response force to be able to reinforce any part of the German front in 1944. That's not how it started, however. This particular division was part of the 25th Wave, which was formed in January 1944. And these 6 divisions, there were 6, 5 ended up in Normandy actually. These were formed. These were built around an existing reinforced regiment that was not been on the front, was formed in Germany, and then that's basically half a division already. So it's one regiment, it's an light artillery battalion, and it's an engineer company plus various support elements. So you basically have half a division. Now, usually you would not have half a division if you have one regiment, because a normal German infantry division has 3 regiments. But these divisions, these 25th Wave Division had only 2 regiments, but unlike regular divisions at this time, they still had 3 infantry battalions. But because you only have 2 regiments to support, the number of heavy weapons in these you need to support the infantry is lower. That's especially true for the heavy weapons companies in the regiments themselves. But they also made changes to the artillery regiment, and that's one of the most significant deviations from a regular division. A regular division would have 1 light infantry of artillery battalion per regiment, basically. So in this case, it's okay to have 2 light artillery battalions. But the one thing they changed for these divisions was they would only get 2 batteries per light battalion. But as you can see already on this particular map of overview, this division actually has 3, and I'll explain later why. Another thing where these divisions differed was in their heavy artillery battalion, because these were armed with 88 millimeter guns, usually anti-tank guns, but also sometimes flak guns, and that's quite unusual using these guns in an artillery role. It was possible, absolutely, but not ideal. And a normal division would have 15 centimeter howitzers, and that's considerably heavier piece of ordnance. So why does this division have 3 batteries in its light artillery battalions? And the reason is that this division was being transformed in the beginning, March 1944, when they decided we're going to turn this into an air landing division. But if you want to land a division by air, it needs to be air mobile or air transportable. And the best way to do that is to make sure it doesn't have too heavy equipment. So parts of the division were changed and modified to be able to transport by air. And one of the elements that was changed was a significant part of this artillery regiment. And you can see these black triangles underneath some of the symbols. And that's the symbol for a mountain type formation. So the light battalions and the regimental headquarters were transformed into a mountain formation. And why did they do that? Because they're lighter in equipment. These were equipped with mountain howitzers, which you can take apart if you have to. And that's the famous story that you often read about this division. It was armed with mountain howitzers, and that's partially correct. And the problem with these howitzers is these fire a different, even if they're 10.5 centimeters, they fire a different type of ammunition than the regular 10.5 centimeter howitzers. So that's a problem. But this division had already had a light artillery battalion when it was formed. And those were regular batteries. And that's why this division was able to get another. They already had a normal artillery piece of howitzers, light howitzers, and then they got 16 additional mountain howitzers. So they ended up with more, and they, for some reason, did not have to give up their old equipment. And these particular batteries are important when we go to the next slide. Sorry, no, it's a slightly later slide, sorry. But one other thing we hear a lot about the division, also in a lot of books, that's that this division was specially trained for anti-airborne or anti-air landing operations. And I was quite curious about it because I couldn't find anything in the German records about this that I was going through. And I was trying to figure out where does this information come from. And I tracked this down to ultimately to Chester Wilmot in The Struggle for Europe from 1952. And unfortunately, he did not provide an actual source, so we don't know what he based this on. But it was a dead end, and I'm pretty confident that this is the origin of the story because almost everybody used the exact same phrasing. That's specially trained. If you read quotes, but it's always specially trained, and it very much looks like this comes from Chester Wilmot. So fortunately for this division, the training schedules have survived, and I found those at a later time, and then I was able to look what did they really do about this. So did they really prepare for anti-airborne operations? And the answer is sort of not. Because what you see here on the right is from the training plans from one of the two regiments. And this mentions that in this 8 week of 9 week training period, they spent 1 week on anti-airborne operations as part of all the other things they were doing. So you can see there's on the left, there is 6 different topics, and on the right, there's 3 different topics, and only this particular regiment I've been able to find any mention of this, of doing something special about anti-airborne operations. So to say that this division was specially trained for anti-airborne operations is just not. 1 week just before being sent to Normandy, I mean, we're talking about 17th April to 23rd of April, so there's not a whole lot of time and effort being put into this. So that's very much an exaggeration to put it that way.
Brilliant stuff.
So yeah, this one. So what did the division do when it came to Normandy? And this is a very important map, and people tend to overlook this map. This is what the 84th Army Corps was planning to do with this division as it was arriving. So this was their proposal. And there's a few things that are important here. If you look, it's sent to the center of the peninsula, and it's obviously given the mission to defend that area, but it's also given the task with being able to strike to the east coast, to the west coast, to Cherbourg. So that has multiple possible ways of using this division. And what you can see is that most of the combat formations, which have fighting men, the infantry, I mean, and so you can also use engineers in that role. But you can see them, they are on the outskirts of the division sector, the outer line. And you can especially see there's a regiment, the 1058 regiment, deployed along the N13 highway. And what's also significant in this is that even if the specific areas, so the circles around these formations aren't quite correct, it does illustrate something that's very important, because these battalions were formed and were grouped together with additional artillery elements, and they were formed into battle groups. This was already done before the invasion. And the idea was that you have your infantry, you would dig them in, and with artillery, with local artillery support, because the Germans felt that if there's going to be an airborne landing, you will always be surprised, and for some time you will be outnumbered. So how do you deal with that? You dig in on the high ground, you make sure your weapons are ready day and night to deal with the enemy, and you basically form all-round defenses, and you do that at this reinforced battalion level, and then you do it at company level, and you do it at platoon level, and then you do it even at section level, and you end up with 2 or 3 men type foxholes that you can defend. The problem with this approach is that yes, you will not be overrun, but you are also not going to overrun airborne forces at their weakest moment when they're landing, because then you need to assemble your troops in force, or if you don't do that, you need to be very aggressive going after these troops as they are landing. One of the problems is that, as you can see, there are very few troops in the center of this particular the division sector, and that's a bit of a, it's not completely correct, because this is where the service and support and supply troops were stationed, and these two were issued to dig in, to prepare themselves to avoid the villages unless they needed it for their activities, but basically to hold the high ground and be able to defend themselves. So you can see that troops landing east of the Meurthe would have encountered real infantry, but troops landing in the center, they would encounter some of the engineer troops, but also, for instance, Field Army Post Office personnel was fighting as an anti-airborne force in the first days after the invasion. And that's something you never see, but that's not unusual. In fact, all German forces in Normandy and in the West that were not really on the coast were instructed to be able to fight against airborne troops if that would happen. So that's not something really special. One thing I want to point out here as well is Battle Group Richter. And Battle Group Richter is a force people always overlook. It's almost never mentioned, but you can see it's already here. And this was formed this wasn't a battalion, but this was a battle group formed around a core of the anti-tank company of this regiment. And it gave up some of its anti-tank capabilities, and it received infantry from neighboring formations. And they built sort of a fourth battle group within this regiment. And this is the regiment of battalion and battle group, not really battalion, that was defending Hill 20 south of St. Mary-Glees on D-Day. And it also included elements of regimental headquarters, some replacement elements, but this is why they were there. This is also where the anti-tank guns came from that helped stop Task Force RAF as they tried to break through along the highway on the evening of D-Day. And if you don't understand what's going on, it's very difficult to see what's really going on. And there's some mention of it, but never really as a battle group. And that's why it's important. This map is very important. So what else is important on this map? Those are the two batteries on the right of the map. And we all know one from Band of Brothers, the Précourt battery, and there's also the Oldie battery. And these batteries were there because they replaced 3 batteries that had already been there in January. So it's not really a new development, but since one division was moved to the West Coast and this division came up and they took over the position, but they only had 2 batteries available instead of 3. Otherwise there would have been 3. And these batteries are the original artillery pieces that had been with the division. So these are the regular German and light howitzers, the regular German type, and they've grouped them together because they fire the same ammunition, so it makes sense to put these together instead of taking some of these specialized mountain guns together. So that's what you can see from this particular map, and this hopefully gives a better understanding of how this division was deployed and what its basic tactics were against airborne forces.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah. So the other map, I forgot to highlight it and mention that I highlighted it, was the headquarters of the division. It's in the center. Yeah, you can see the square. That was where the division headquarters was planned. It's indeed where it was. And in a lot of books have mentioned, especially older ones, that this was its Chateau Haute in Bernaville. And people have wondered, why is this the case? Because nobody ever really called it that. So what does this come from? And that's one of the questions you can answer when you start looking at the German records. So that's the next slide.
There we go.
Yeah. So you can see that this actually comes from German records. So 7th Army already recorded this Chateau Haute, and then it was also intercepted by Ultra, and it ends up in Allied records as well. So Chateau Haute does have a real obvious German explanation. But if you would look at an Allied map, an American or British map, you don't understand where this comes from. But if you look at the original French and German maps, then it makes sense. Because if you take a close look, you see it actually says Bernaville Chateau, but if you take a very casual look, it looks like it says Chateau Haute. But in reality, Haute belongs to Goeteville, Upper Goeteville, and Bas Goeteville, Lower Goeteville. And that's where this mistake comes from. So that's one of the things that if you start looking at German records, things become a lot more clear, even small peculiarities like this one.
I'm having that exact same issue with some research up near Pourby at the moment, where they've misread how a map is done. It's amazing how that's twice it's happened.
I'm not surprised. Brilliant. So next slide. So let's take a look about a little bit about the death of General Falley. I know Giles Milton, who was on just the show before me, briefly mentioned this, and also Lieutenant Brennan. So let's take a look. So one story we hear a lot is, you can see you read sometimes, you can say a lot, but is that the Germans didn't know that General Falley had been killed. Now that's not true at all, because we can see already on on D-Day it's being mentioned as high level as Obey West, so they knew. And on June the 10th, they even wrote a report about the rough circumstances of his death. So this particular story sometimes is not correct, and the German records already prove that. So next one. So most people know the Brennan story if they've heard it in the past from Cornelius Ryan, The Longest Day. It's not in the movie, but it is in the book, or from Paul Carrel, Invasion, They're Coming, who was of course an SS propaganda officer. So take everything the rest with a pinch of salt, or a mountain of salt. And what we see in both their approaches is they take a journalistic approach. They tell interesting stories that are catchy, that are pretty sexy, but it's not what's going to not necessarily really close to the truth. In this particular case, for instance, Cornelius Ryan writes about the type of staff car it was. We know that's not the case. So where does this information come from? It's a detail that sounds interesting, but it's actually vague. And this is often what you can see. The more detail that's being added, the more you should be doubtful about what's going on. But what Cornelius Ryan does is he clearly links Brennan to shooting Falley in the road after he was thrown from his car. And that's a story most people tell like that. Even if Brennan's own story is far less specific, he does mention shooting at an officer in the road, and it's a very powerful story. But he doesn't actually link his story to killing Falley. But he mentions Falley later. But if you really look at how he says things, you can already see that's not exactly what he says, and also possibly not what he meant. But it's in the book like this. But if you go to the next slide, you will see what the Germans were saying. And we know what a key German was saying is because the driver survived. And this driver was interrogated first by the 82nd Airborne and then also as a prisoner of war in the United Kingdom. And he very specifically explains what was going on and how he describes the events. It's very clear that Lieutenant General Falley wasn't killed by Brennan in the road, but that was the supply officer, the logistics officer of the division. And if you read other descriptions of the events, it's very clear that Lieutenant Falley was riding shotgun and was killed instantly and remained in the car. Something else that's interesting is the story of how Falley came to return to his headquarters. And usually it's told as that Falley was driving through the night and then somehow realized through bombing and flashes or something in the background, something is going on and I need to return. And that's a story how it's often told, because the driver was never asked that question, what were you doing, what's going on exactly. So there was room to interpret it like that. However, if you would look at the secret recordings, there is a conversation from an officer of the 77th Infantry Division, which were in the Saint-Malo area, and he explains what actually happened. Because Falley wasn't driving through the night, but he was spending the night in the very famous Mont Saint-Michel, about 2/3 of the road away to Rennes. So he was in a position where he was able to still return to his division if required, but also to arrive at Rennes early. And this is where he was where the 77th Infantry Division reached him and told him to return to his division. So he wasn't driving through the night, he was spending the night at the very famous Mont Saint-Michel as a last-minute decision. And there is still doubts, and we talked about this in the past, and at what time exactly was Falley killed? Because you get the impression it's dark and everything, and then you start reading other things about gliders having landed already, and then sort of your time schedule starts shifting, and then this account comes and they say he didn't leave until 8 o'clock in the morning, which shifts everything. And trying to confirm this timeline is still very, very complicated. But maybe we'll find an exact answer at some point.
Oh, I thought you were going to give us the exact answer. I thought you were going to say, from my research, it happened at 6:43 precisely.
I wish. If his watch broke and someone found his watch and kept it at the exact, then we might know. But right now, it's very confusing, and there's something some evidence says later and others said earlier. So that's no. Unfortunately, that one is still out. So there's still plenty for us to research.
But I know we're gonna answer the next slide to some extent. But yeah, the human drama of Falley's death is really interesting to research and pin down. But actually, maybe the better question is, how does it infect the performance stroke reaction of the division? That's going to be more in line with the outcome of D-Day than exactly whether he was killed on the left side of the road or the right side of the road or in the car or whatever. But we'll move on.
Yeah. So this is a map that shows the Germans on D+1, 7th of June. And this is from 7th Army. And this one, if you follow this one, you're still missing a whole lot. So if you go to the next slide, which is pretty much identical, I'll also return to D-Day a bit. So this is far more accurate. And you can see there's a lot more formations fighting and trying to attack the beachhead on D+1. And if you do not dive deeper into the German side, you're missing the contribution of a whole lot of elements. And there's a lot more artillery involved than the original German map would suggest. There's anti-tank, self-propelled anti-tank guns, assault guns involved. The Germans are pretty much throwing everything in they can spare on this particular day. And it's also when this attack fails on D+1, the Germans go over to the defense, and it's basically over. And they do not try to throw in this area. They do not try to throw the Americans back. There's some attempt around Carentan on the 13th, but that's for another day. But if you want to look at what's going on D-Day, as I've shown, they already knew on D-Day that Falley had been killed. We've also seen the map on how these elements of the division were deployed. So you can see that one of the regiments was very much on the west coast, and they needed to be brought up first before they would be able to attack. So there wasn't a whole lot they could do. And also the 1058th regiment was placed under control of the 709th Infantry Division, which attacked from the north. Their General von Schlieben was missing, so there was that particular problem. And from the west, the division did have need to organize, but they would always have needed to organize for some things. And they did receive a replacement division commander from one of the divisions in the area, and he apparently took over on D-Day already. And with the division's operation officers still present, preparations made to certain scenarios, the impact of killing Falley must have been somewhat limited, but also restricted probably to plans that had been made before, whereas Falley himself might have made different choices based on the situation at hand at the particular time. So I think, after the fighting on the early days, you can see that the division suffers a lot of casualties, and this is going to 26th July. The division is being pushed back all the way, and this is just sort of to end the division. But it remains in action, and it remains in action because it consists of elements. It's a battle group at this particular stage. It very quickly becomes a battle group. It stays alive because there's lots of reinforcements from other elements. So on this particular situation overview of the battle group on 26th July, at the time of Operation Cobra, it includes elements of 6 different divisions. And the red bits are the only bits left from the 91st Air Landing Division. So the combat elements of the division are almost all gone. There's some infantry left. Artillery has been dispatched to another division, so that's why they're not here. But you can see that it's a hodgepodge of all kinds of formations, including coastal artillery headquarters that's coordinating the artillery. There's an assault gun brigade. There's a construction engineer battalion. It's a mess, but this is how this division stays in action even after suffering catastrophic losses itself. So yeah, let's move to the other one. This is also 26th July. You can see the original German line would have been at Lessay the day before, but you can see how Operation Cobra is starting to cut off the division. So ultimately they decide sending the 200 of the 91st division completely towards the west coast, but we're also going to shift it with the 243rd, which is slightly more mobile, and we're going to send that east. So that's why the 91st Air Landing Division ends up retreating along the west coast of the peninsula. And this illustrates the threat posed by Cobra to this division, and it indeed ends up being cut off before it's able to escape through Avranches, although the support element would have been sent ahead and had a better chance of surviving. But the troops trying to hold the front, they were outflanked on the east, and they had no chance of survival. And that brings us to basically the last slide. And the division remnants being cut off west of Avranches, they try to get through Avranches. That doesn't work. So what do? In the night of 30 to 31st July, they decide to escape by crossing the mud flats between Avranches and Mont Saint-Michel. And some of the vehicles got stuck, some men and equipment got through. So basically, the end of the division came at Mont Saint-Michel, where it also started for General Falley. And that's how I want to conclude for today.
Oh,
I think we're right
brilliant
on schedule.
professional tying up there, Niels. And you bring it back to the Mont Saint-Michel there. You've done this before, my friend. So again, we will remind people there's the cover of the book there, and then there's a couple of questions for you. Then I will have to bring things to an end, but you know, just so much insight. I mean, I'm a Normandy guy, but every time I speak to you, you don't just add information to my database. You completely turn me 180 on things, and you make me go, I thought I knew this stuff, and I realize I don't. So John is asking the pertinent question that we can pre-order via the website, Panzer Rex, but is there a definite date when they will start being shipped? Do we know that yet?
I know it's actively being printed right now, and somewhere in the next few weeks it will start shipping, as I see it before the end of the month. But when exactly, I will put it on Twitter, I'll put it on my Facebook, and we'll see from there. And we're trying to push the printer to move it forward a bit, but we'll see how that goes.
And you're being praised by people like Phil Blood and History Explorer in the comments there. Scholarship of the highest standard, fabulous, bravo from Brad over on OTD and military history. And you know, I can only echo those. I remember meeting you in Arnhem in 2019 with you clutching your lever arch files full of all this information, and now I understand why you're protecting it so clear, carefully, because it was history gold you were carrying. So yeah, I'm going to stop complimenting you. Now, people will think I've got some kind of weird man crush on you, but in some ways I have got a weird man crush on you because it is good. And so Kevin is asking, how many books in the series?
It depends a bit. As I see it right now, just the first 1A and 1B will be about these 6 infantry divisions very much, and also the period before the invasion. The Volume 2 will probably be the independent infantry, the Ostroepen, which I'm going to spend a lot of time on, construction troops, Atlantic Wall, maybe Organization Toad. And then there will be a book about the SS divisions, 2nd and 17th, Fallschirmjäger elements. So that's flag. So I think 5 or 6 in this element, and I'm also at this stage starting to do research for a Calvados focus book, which hopefully will cover the 352nd, the 716th, the 711th, and the 346th. So that's
I'm literally drooling at the prospect of these books there. I just hope that your work is received and studied by those who need to see it, and it gets out far and wide, because it's going to change the way we look at it. And I also hope it inspires another generation of historians that, you know, don't be completely intimidated by German archives and German resources, and looking at the different areas you've looked at to put this information together. It can be done. You know, it's just it takes
there's
time.
more available online than ever before. So it's
yeah.
There's a lot of the work that I've been doing and been working for 15 years. And if I would do it today, it would be much easier. So if you want to start doing this, there's a lot more information available today. So that's really good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, Niels, it's been an absolute delight talking to you. We'll bring you back at some point in the future for a deeper dive on something else, although we don't want to distract you from your writing process and your important electioneering polling station work. So, fantastic. So again, folks, the link is in the description below. Just go out there and get the book. Don't even question it. Put it on pre-order, because it is going to be the essential first volume of a obviously essential series. So there we are. In a few minutes' time, I'll be back with Garrett Graff talking about his new book on oral histories. And it's interesting how there is overlap between these different shows, and also the different way people share stories. There's kind of a storytelling way. There's the archival way. It's all important. So, Niels, enjoy the rest of the day, my friend. And folks, I will see you in a few minutes' time. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.